Welcome, everyone, to the first of 3 panels in our Science for a Sustainable Future series to commemorate Earth Month. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's session. Dr. Maho Chebo is Managing Director of Envision Digital, a global AIoT technology leader for the net zero transition. Recently, he has been working to advance the net zero agenda in the European region. Dr. Chebo, the floor is yours.
Thank you and welcome to everyone. This is the first of 3 events in 2023 on Science for a Sustainable Future series. Today's session is on energy in the transition to net zero. That's a big goal. We are holding today's webinar in Zoom. You will be muted and cameras turned off, but please feel free to send us your responses, your questions, at any time by using that Q&A or chat function in the menu bar. So today's webinar will be recorded and the recording shared shortly after the event. Should you be dropped or have any problem disconnected out of the webinar at any time, please use the same log in link to rejoin us when you are ready. So we will have 3 eminent panelists. I will be introducing everyone, and then we will have a Q&A session at the end. I will be starting by Wei-Jian Li, then by Irina Cañas-Diaz and Francisca La Rosa, and then we go to the Q&A. So let me introduce Wei-Jian Li first. Wei is in the teaching at academic world. He is a professor and director of the Energy Systems Research Center at the University of Texas at Arlington. His research interests include utility deregulation, renewable energy, energy storage, electrical safety, smart grids, and microgrids. He has provided on-site training courses for power engineers in Panama, China, Taiwan, Korea, Saudi Arabia, Thailand, and Singapore. He should have like a track record of mileage, actually, across the globe. And he is a fellow of the IEEE and a registered professional engineer in the state of Texas. The floor is yours, Wei.
Okay. Good day, everybody. And from the discussion point of view, I would like to share with basically how can the industry and the residential side, how can we reach the zero carbon emission? And as we know, in the 2018, the IPCC reported that we would like to maintain the temperature within 1.5 degrees C. We would require to reach the net zero carbon emission by 2050. And yeah, it's easy to say, then be done, because from industry point of view, they have to look at the balance between the cost benefit to achieve the goal and remain competitive. And for the residential side, that is basically we have to develop a more creative strategy to encourage their utilization on the renewable energy by adjusting their energy consumption patterns. And here I will try to look at it from from the industry and from the residential point of view. Okay, most of the industry, they are tap into the wholesale market. And the utility deregulation is a trend in the utility industry. So the wholesale price of electricity is time and the location dependent. So you can see on the right-hand side, I'm using the Electric Reliability Council of Texas as an example. And you can see here, the price of electricity at 11.35 has a different pattern from the 12.25. So that is moving target, and then depends on the supply and demand and the different location, they're going to have a different market price. So to take the advantage of this one or meet the challenge of this one, the industry should establish a holistic approach to reduce the carbon footprint through integrated resource planning. And then they need a dynamic scheduling, because there is not a business as usual anymore. And then even people say, okay, peak shaving or peak the shifting, that sometimes is not equivalent to the reduced cost. And then the other one is, okay, you try to be more proactive, then you try to do the demand response, and then also the renewable energy integration, because again, a lot of time the renewable by itself is intermittency in nature. And then how to integrate it become a challenge. And then of course it's also present opportunities, because for the industry, they can have their own on-site generation. They have a distributed energy resource and energy storage systems. So how can they optimize the operation become a future challenge or future opportunity for the industry? From the retail side, and we have seen a lot of time of use rate. And I have done research on different country and the different structure on the time of use rate. And normally that you will see the customer kinds of, okay, the effect of the time of use structure kinds of diminishing when the time move on. People kinds of get the basic return back to the original their lifestyle. And so in Texas, that basically, okay, there's a very creative one, and we realize 0 is a very powerful number, because when people are looking for the free electricity, and then they kind of stick to it. So that is basically from the retail market point of view. And I have seen this is a very successful program. They provide incentive to promote the behavior change. And then like in Texas, that we call it daytime solar, nighttime free in Texas price structure. So from the 5 a.m. to 7:59 p.m., then they charge you the very high premium. Is the 25.2 cents per kilowatt hour plus the transmission distribution service provider charge. So it will cost you about 30 cents per kilowatt hour. However, if you can shift your schedule to the 8 p.m. to the 5 a.m., 4:59 a.m., then you have a free electricity. Even the TDSP charge is waived. And you can see here, this is one of the customer that the behavior change. And then during the free time, the purple line over there, they use a lot of, the customer use a lot of energy. And during the time that the customer has to pay, they basically just keep into the minimum. And then you can see on the right-hand side, it's about 85 to 90% of the power usage is on the free charge zone. So on this way here, it will be able to push the customer behavior change, because you can need most of the inland renewable energy, especially the wind generation, that the wind blow at the nighttime and then they stop at the daytime. So this will be a good incentive, and then to promote the renewable energy usage. The daytime they use the solar, and then nighttime they basically tap into the other kinds of renewable energies. So this is basically my presentation here, and I just throw in here and then for our further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Wei. And let me remind you, if you have any questions, please put your questions in the chat. We will have some time at the end for Q&As. Now I would like to introduce the second panelist. The second panelist is Irene Cañas Diaz. I hope I pronounce it well. Maybe in Spanish is Irene. Mrs. Cañas spent much of her career with the Costa Rican Institute of Electricity, eventually serving as the executive president and chairwoman of the board. Most recently, she has been working to achieve Costa Rica's goal to decarbonize their economy. Mrs. Cañas served as Costa Rica's Vice Minister of Environment and Energy from 2014 to 2018, and represented Costa Rica in the Environmental Policy Committee of the OECD. She is also a member of the Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition, by the way, as well as a member of the CET Council of Engineers for Energy Transitions, advising the UN Secretary General. So, Irena, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. For me, it's a pleasure to share with you some of the experience of Costa Rica on the decarbonization of our economy. I will share my screen. Yeah. Just 1 second. I would like to give you a little bit of Costa Rica information. Where are we located? We're in Central America. You can see this red little country in the middle of America. Our area is around, I'm sorry, back. We are around 51,000 square kilometers, and our population is around 5 million people, a little bit more of that. And in terms of emissions, the energy sector is currently the sector more responsible of the emission in Costa Rica. But I would like to show you that in this sector, in the energy sector, transport is the responsible of 75% of our emissions. So our main problem to get to net zero is in the transport sector. As you can see on the right graphic, our electricity is almost 100% renewable. The last 5 or 6 years, we've been generating more than 98%, 99% of our electricity with renewable sources. Most of the electricity comes from hydro, and then we have geothermal and wind, and a little bit of biomass and a little bit of solar. Almost 99.4% of our population has access to electricity. So as I mentioned before, our main challenge is in the transport sector. Our emissions comes from the transport sector. When we were analyzing this problem, we found out that we needed to do specific policies in order to reduce the emissions on the transport sector. What we found out first is that we needed to teach the people about climate change. Not everyone understands what is climate change, the impacts on the weather, on the climate, on the health. The other thing is, right now in Costa Rica, people prefer to use their own car to go from small distances and also long distances. We lack of policies to improve the public service on transport. And also the other thing is that we didn't have any normative or regulation to import used cars. So our main problem was that everyone can import a very old car, very inefficient car, and we needed to do something about that. So we made a list of different policies, but for make them suitable for people, we needed the people to understand why. So what we did first was to get together with the universities and also the importers of vehicles, used vehicles, and we shared with them the data of quality of air in Costa Rica. We had the data. One university is in charge of analyzing and have all the information on quality of air. So we decided that, okay, we're going to share this with the population. We're going to tell them what is happening in our country with the quality of air, what happens with the diseases on children, on elder people, allergies, asthma, everything. And after that, we are going to explain to them why we need it. First of all, to regulate the age of the used cars that we are going to import from other countries to Costa Rica, because we need to clean the fleet that is circulating in Costa Rica. The other thing that we did was, okay, we are going to improve the quality of the fuels. Costa Rica, we don't produce fuels, we import all of them. So we decided that we were going to import better quality of fuels. And the other thing is, we wanted to change the way taxes are related with cars. Right now, we have upside down the methodology to pay taxes on cars. So right now, more efficient cars, they pay more taxes. Newer cars, they pay more taxes. And we needed to do it the other way completely. And under the principle of who pollutes more, they should pay more. For that, we also needed to sit down with different stakeholders and to look for solutions all together. So we started with different kind of solutions, but first of all, we needed the people to understand why we needed to make all those changes. When we sat down with the importers of used vehicles, we had to negotiate and to look for a win-win. So we told them, okay, you are no longer be able to import very old cars. So I believe the first restriction were 15-year-old cars. So no more import cars older than 15 years. Then 2 years after that, we were going to 12-year-old cars, and then 10, and we were supposed to get at least to 8-year-old cars imported in Costa Rica. But we told them, okay, we are going to give you the tools and the normative so you can import electric cars, used electric cars without taxes for a period of time. So we started to negotiate that, and now in Costa Rica we have a law with a lot of benefits for electric cars and benefits for new electric cars, but also used electric cars. So we needed to do that with the importers of used cars, and also we needed to negotiate the quality of fuels. So with all that, now we have a better fleet of cars in Costa Rica. Then again, we are doing some policies so we can improve the quality of the transport, the public transport, so people can decide if they want or they should use the public transport instead of their own cars. So the problem, they has to be analyzed in different ways, and we also need different solutions so we can reduce the emissions on the transport sector in Costa Rica to get to net zero. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. This is impressive, actually. Probably there is another country like Norway, which has like 90% of the energy production, power production, which comes from hydro. But here in your case, you've got like 73%, and then still have an energy mix as well with geothermal close to 14% and other renewables. And definitely there is a lot of learning. So even if you have most of what you produce is renewables, but you still have a problem with the transportation, which is still using the majority from thermal car, and 75% of the emissions in Costa Rica coming from that. So I'm sure that we will have a very good conversation and questions and answer session around this topic. Now, let me introduce you to the next speaker, Francesca La Rosa. Dr. La Rosa is currently a postdoc at the KTH Climate Action Center. Previously, she served as a postdoc research fellow at the University College London. Francesca La Rosa holds a PhD in climate change sciences from Ca' Foscari University in Venice, Italy, fantastic place. She's also an affiliated researcher at the Euro-Mediterranean Center for Climate Change, an economist by training. Her research interests lie in the intersection between digital technologies and climate adaptation. Welcome to the club. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very kind introduction, and thank you for having me. My points here are actually tackling the big elephant in the room, which is how do we make happen that all this transformation in the energy transition are actually taking place? And the big question is money, so finance. Where are these resources, capital resources, coming from? And I'd like just to start with a sort of forecast that came out from the International Energy Agency 1 year ago, so June 2022, in the World Energy Investment Report, which is a flagship report by the organization. There, the agency was forecasting a growth in world energy investment by 8% in 2022 to reach a total number of approximately 2.4 trillion USD. Recently, these estimates have confirmed that actually we didn't reach the 2.4 trillion USD last year, but only 0.5 trillion, which, just to give you an idea, represent less than 1/3 of the average investment needed each year between 2023 and 2030, according to a scenario of 1.5 degree centigrades. So we're still far, in a way, from providing the majority of resources that we would need. And it's important that we acknowledge that, because still, despite the kind of slow progresses, clean energy investment is really starting to pick up. And one of the reasons why this is happening is because the cost of renewable energy technologies has fallen. Just to give an estimate, between 2010 and 2020, the cost of solar PV fell by 15% each year. So there was a sort of technological learning rate of around 20% per doubled of installed capacity. This is an incredible journey in a way, because if we think when the Paris Agreement was signed, which is 2015, this was absolutely very far. And the investments in clean energy was just over 2%, while since 2020, those investments have risen to 12%, so 10% more. The thing that we should keep in mind, though, is that whenever we're changing our energy system, we're also switching our financing needs. So as my colleagues were saying before me, of course, we need to kind of guarantee that there is a supply and demand balance, especially when renewable energy technologies are entering the stage. And renewable power is at the end of a positive trend, together with improved efficiency. However, whenever we're developing renewable power, we also need to invest hardly on battery energy storage, which is something that before was not actually foreseen at this unprecedented scale, massive scale. And the estimates of the investment needed in these critical minerals, or so-called, are very volatile, depending on how many critical minerals we include and the time frame that we're considering. But if we take only lithium supply alone, lithium supply would need to grow by a factor of 7 between 2020 and 2030 versus the previous decade growth. So we're talking about a massive shift in a way that then will also lead to a massive geopolitical change and geopolitical understanding of the different powers that are entering into play. Whenever we're talking about the factor of 7, we're talking about 40 billion USD investments by the end of the current decade, and peaking almost 8 billion every year until 2028. So we're talking about a huge disbursement in a way. And we need to be mindful that this disbursement needs to happen simultaneously, coordinately, both in developing emerging economies and in the Western world. And this is not what we are observing right now, because despite the big calls for in order the transition and the coordinating action, emerging economies are still lagging behind, and the portion and the quota of climate finance that was promised to them in the Copenhagen Accord in 2009 and then reiterated in 2015 has not been honored, which means that we're still very much lagging behind in meeting our promises. I think that it's important also to be mindful before closing that whatever we do on the climate action side has impacts and repercussions on other sustainable development dimensions. And this is the perfect case, for example, for battery technologies or critical minerals, which provide livelihoods and create opportunities also for the least, for the most vulnerable countries in the world. So we need to understand, whenever we are tackling this transition, what are the synergies and what are the trade-offs between climate action and other SDGs. And this is something that here we are exploring at KTH heavily, but that many other research groups are posing as a question, because especially when we're talking about investments in the clean energy transition, there are significant regional differences and variations, which underline the risk of new dividing lines on energy and climate. And we don't necessarily want to repropose the unequal and unfair world that we have been witnessing so far with a fossil fuel dominated economy. I'll close here, so to leave space for questions, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Francesca. Very interesting. Then we are ahead of time, so which is good news. That means we can spend more time on the Q&As that I will initiate, and then I will pick up some of the questions in the chat as well. You mentioned, you spoke about it, but I mean, the questions are open to any one of you who would like to pick it and answer it. But my first question would be, how do we support the companies to get remunerated when there are like smart building projects, for example, where we have batteries in the game, where we have artificial intelligence? Do we reward them for savings? How do we get the finance world, the finance experts who are providing financing, for example, working together with the leading technologies?
It's a very interesting question, and I'm not sure that we will solve it today, but I think it's important to acknowledge that some companies are actually doing good, and they are actually progressing toward a more clean and sustainable practice across their supply chain. There were calls and efforts, for example, in tracking down the greenhouse gas emissions at scope 1, 2, and 3. But I don't think the tracking down greenhouse gas emissions is enough per se. We need to reward companies that actually have a more holistic understanding of what a sustainable practice means. And this involves the respects for human rights, the respects on the social dimension, the respects for laborers and workers, but also the understanding of what are the potential spillovers, not just on the social side, but also on the governance side. And I think that in that respect, the markets can definitely be a good ally in valuing those good options, provided that we have a shared, accepted, and understood framework that include all the different SDGs into account while analyzing climate investments, for example.
Thank you. Arina, Wayan, would you like to add on this first question?
Yes, some of the question people ask that basically what is the reason, okay, on the price structures point of view for the residential side. I saw the question over there, and this is also depends on the structure of the market rule, because they basically, when they try to look at the transmission distribution service provider charge, they relate it to the how many percent of the market participant occupy their energy during the peak hours. And on that way, so that gives the retailer the incentive to provide the structure to shift out the peak hour. And then that it become a multiple, this basically we consider it's a win-win-win situation, because if you can shift the peak hour consumption, then you can avoid use the high price generation, and you can defer the transmission upgrade. And from the retailer point of view, they can reduce their transmission distribution service provider charge. And for the customer, they can enjoy the low price electricity. So this is it's a basically, you need a very holistic design, and on the incentive program over there. So on that way, then you can reach the goal.
Okay. Ariana, anything to add? I mean,
Yeah.
From the question I had, just to say, I mean, we have received a number of questions in the Q&A. I will come back to that after I ask you these initial questions, if you don't mind. So I will pick up.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll have enough time to pick up all the questions we received. But behind my question is, if you are in the smart building, for example, and there is some work, CapEx, for example, to be done, and there is a continuous monitoring of the building to be done, how do we remunerate the technology companies and the financing companies, for example, who would finance without having the customer at the end to pay? How do we remunerate them? Would the model of energy savings, for example, remuneration and the commitment on energy savings be the model that we should scale, or do you see it scaling, for example, in your experience? Irina, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, but my intervention is related with the transport sector in Costa Rica, so I don't know if anyone.
Okay, I will come back.
Like
I will
jump
come back.
in. Yeah,
I will come back.
Yeah.
Okay, so then my second question would be around the mining companies. Okay, how do we strengthen the cooperation for critical minerals, for example, in the energy transition, right? So of course, the industry of mining is energy intensive. Of course, it involves a lot of the supply chain. So how we need the cooperation as well, and we need to prepare this industry for transition. So what's your thoughts on that?
So I'll start.
Supply chain.
I'll start, but then I think that also Dr. Wei and his experience on supply chain is very useful here. I would say that at present there are many mining companies which are actually putting into practice either a sustainability protocol or several sustainability initiatives, which are very valuable, all of them. Some of which are more structured, some of which are actually less, in a way, holistic. And there are also efforts from the industry side. I'm thinking about ICMM, but other industry bodies, which are trying to develop a sort of either protocols or standards to measure the sustainability performance of these companies, and so to hold them accountable in a way. When I introduced the finance side of it, is because one actor that is currently not missing but slightly overlooked is precisely the financial sector. I mean, we already know that the financial sector is heavily regulated in certain cases. Not all the regulations always work, but there are many regulations in place, and that's where investors, the shareholders, can actually play a huge part in holding their mining companies accountable when it comes to sustainability performance. So I think that we should strengthen the dialogue between the two. The standards that the finance sector has on one hand, and the standards that the mining sector will have to follow, or is already following, and see where these synergies exist or where these gaps exist. But in a way, I think there is quite some movement now, especially on the mining sector. It's just a matter of agreeing on one hand on, not just a matter, but it's mostly also, the starting point would be to agree what are the real sustainability dimensions that we're good at measuring, and what are those sustainability dimensions which are not measured enough. so that we can strengthen those. And that's where academia play a role, but where I think that we should really sit down, all of us, and find a common understanding.
So what you are saying is it's not like an industrial story or a policy story. Academia should be part of the game. There is a way, there are equations that are models where we need to be precise about what we are measuring, for example, whether it's the carbon emissions, whether we are measuring also the energy consumption, and using referentials, for example, like IPMVP, for example, for the energy consumption in buildings. So we have to have the academia developing these different models that we would be using to measure things precisely and see how we can modify it. Let me jump now to the transportation sector. And is there like a clean fossil fuels? Are they in the energy transition ways, for example, with the example of cars that Irina spoke about, where we can have high quality fuel imports, where we can deploy at a large scale EVs and so on. So from your experience, Irina, how can you tell us more? I saw some of the comments where people were very impressed in that experience in Costa Rica.
Yeah, sure. Well, in the case of Costa Rica, we have an expansion plan for the generation, and we have now the capacity to introduce more electric vehicles and also electric buses in our matrix, and we can face that increase of demand with renewable sources. So now we have a law that we are trying to accelerate the transition into more electric vehicles and also electric buses. And there's also a project to have an electric train for passengers, and also so we can transport goods from the Pacific to the Atlantic in Costa Rica and the whole. So this is a very important project, and we are thinking in doing with an electric train. So yes, we have the capacity to increase the needs of electricity, but we can do it with renewables. Right now, we have a lot of hydro, but we still have potential on geothermal and wind also, because it's also important to have this mix. It's not a good idea to rely just in one source, as we did a few years ago. We had almost all of our electricity relying on hydro, and during the dry season, we were facing huge problems when we have longer dry season and not enough storage to face that. But yes, we are looking into have more electric vehicles, train, buses in Costa Rica. But I think that is, and I want to point on this, it is very important to keep educating people about climate change. We had a very important campaign a few years ago, but those campaigns should be sustainable. They should be continuous. Like we have campaigns when we are going to start a school season, we have videos and everything asking drivers to be careful when they drive around schools. Well, in this case, we should continue educating people about climate change, so we can have an impact in their consumption habits. So in terms of transport, now we have more people that use bicycles in Costa Rica. We didn't have that 10 years ago. Now you see more people using bicycles, walking, sharing their cars with other people, because now they are aware of the problem and the climate change problem and the health of the people. So I think we shouldn't give this a less importance. It is also very important to educate people on the problem, so we can have this impact in their habitat and on their habit of consumption.
Very good. I think what you are saying is an overall portfolio of actions and a number of stakeholders that should be part of the game. The education, the technology, the fact that we also look at the import-export, we look at the common transportation as well and make it much more interesting, for example, for people to take common transportation like their individual polluting cars and so on. It's a complex, but it could be solved by thinking really big and thinking at the holistic story as well, involving all the stakeholders. Thank you. So let me pick up some of the questions then. So we have, like, for example, a comment here, like, congrats on your presentation on Costa Rica. Tax strategies are very important mechanism for decarbonization. Regarding the car business, we have similar strategy right now in Brasilia, our capital, to shift to electric cars. And then, you know, if free annual tax for those car owners, for example. So this is an example. It's not a question. We see also some other options that are provided here in terms of the price for charging consumption. Let me pick up now a question from Saira Said. How will you address the impact of rapid weather shifts in an area on renewable energy production? Okay, how to tackle that with this sudden climate or weather shift, for example? Okay, we know that renewable energy is more intermittent, for instance. What are your thoughts? And if you can keep the cameras on.
Yeah, I can share a little bit the experience of Costa Rica, where we have almost 100% of our electricity come from renewables, and we have wind that is intermittent, but it's a great complement with hydro, because in the case of Costa Rica, our best season of winds is during the dry season when we don't have enough water. So it's a perfect match. So we have wind during the dry season, but also we have a storage with hydro. We have like 3 important hydro plants where we can storage water from the rainy season to the dry season. So our storage is reservoirs. And the other thing that help us a lot is the geothermal plants that we have, because geothermal is the only renewable source that it doesn't depend on wind or solar or rain. So I think it's the more faithful source. It will be there the whole year. So I think the mix is very important, and to know how much source do you have and when do you have it. You can arrange to have renewables and to have the electricity you need when you need it, without good planning of sources. That's our experience in Costa Rica, and we have made it. As I mentioned before, the last 5 years we have generated more than 98% of our electricity with renewables.
Thank you. Just to the person who asked the question, Saira Said, is saying that undergraduate energy and environment engineering student, he or she is. So the session is super informative to learn more about the entry cases of the sustainable energy production on consumption. And it's great to keep the platform to connect the people actually with each other. You are absolutely right. I have another question from Asif Hamid. 2 questions. Do you think that the carbon pricing is effective for reducing the carbon footprint, like the carbon tax, for example, or any other way is better? What challenges are faced to implementing the carbon emission control? Who would like to answer?
Well, I can add in something.
Now we see you well.
Yeah, because when you look at the carbon tax, yes, that is because a lot of time when you do the generation side, electrical generation side, then we call it economic dispatch. You try to generate the electricity in the most affordable way, and with the carbon price over there, then you can embed this price structure into that economic dispatch formula over there, and that is basically will force, basically from the economic dispatch point of view, that will force the utility to reduce the fossil fuel usage for the generation. And then, of course, it really depends on the price of electricity, how they generate it, from the natural gas, from the fossil fuel, or from the renewable energies. Yes, that will have impact on the reduction of the carbon footprint. But it's at the present time, you are not going to drive it to zero, because it really depends on the balance between the price, the generation price. So it's yes, that do have the impact on the reduction of the carbon footprint.
Thank you. So I think it's an open question here, and definitely there should be a combination between carbon tax and education and so on. But suddenly, of course, we cannot dream about having everybody educated 100%, and then at the end from themselves, they would not be going for emissions and so on. It's going to be a combination, unfortunately, compared to the aggressive targets we have. Okay. I have now questions that relate as well to the power purchasing and pressure, the economic pressures that people have. I tried a bit to bring them together, something from Daniel Fuentes, who is saying, how do you reconcile the role economic pressures play in the potential rejection of net zero transition measures in Costa Rica, like pollute more, pay more, assuming used vehicles are cheaper? What options would households be given to substitute these options for their transportation? And I will avoid to mention more about the Gilets jaunes in France, because they increased the tax, for example, on the fuel that time, and we went into kind of a revolution in France last year. I will let you answer that. And on the other side, we have Georges Florent Staicu, who is saying, greetings from Bucharest, Romania. Glad to attend this webinar. Currently, we are facing worldwide skyrocketing inflation negatively affecting people, cost of living, and so on. And then he's speaking about OPEC, speaking about the role of the central bank. So linking everything together, and then at the end it goes in the same direction. You know, can we think about the people where their objective, as we say, is the end of the month, while other people have objectives that are the end of the century? And sorry to bring it in the middle of the session, I could have brought it at the end. Who would like to volunteer?
Well, I can answer the first comment you said.
Yes.
Well, lots of solutions should be worked in parallel. So in Costa Rica, when we were talking about the polluter pays more, in the case of fossil fuels, a long time ago, we have decided to have higher taxes on fossil fuels. And we decided that, I don't know, it was like 15 years ago or 20 years ago. And with that taxes, we will be able to finance the protection of our forest. And Costa Rica has more than 25% of our land is under some kind of protection or reserve. So we did that long time ago. So we already had taxes on fossil fuels. What we need to fix right now is taxes on used cars. And some other technologies that they pollute a lot. And when we decided to do that, we had to sit down with different stakeholders to find out the way we can do it without have a huge impact on the middle income population or lower than that. So that's why we work at the same time the law for the benefits on electric vehicles, and electric vehicles, not just new ones, also used ones. So and also we sat down with banks so we can finance that transition into electric vehicles, not just new ones, as I said before, other used electric vehicles. So what I wanted to say is that on terms of taxes and carbon pricing, Costa Rica maybe is not a good example because we did it a long time before, have a tax on the fossil fuels. So that impact was years ago. Now the decisions that we have to make and the changes that we have to make are related with technology, old technology, and how can we do the changes without the less impact. And we managed to do that talking with different stakeholders and work together the changes that we need to do in normative regulation and everything.
Okay, thank you. We have a few minutes left. I know we spend a lot of time on the electric vehicles, EVs, and so on. I have a couple of questions I would like to bring, like how do we make the grid, for example, ready? This is from Julian Thompson. The grid ready. How do we modernize the grid? Anybody would like to speak about the smart grids investments, for example?
So I'm not, I don't have, again, the numbers on top of my mind about investment in smart grids, but this is a clear example of kind of myopic thinking. So we wanted, in a way, to, of course, develop the solar PV and the renewable energy technologies by focusing on costs. So we were saying in the past the costs were too high, and that's why many renewable energy technologies were not witnessing the upscale. But in fact, the problem of high cost for renewables, as in reality, became translated into a problem of balancing electric grids. So in some areas to develop them, and in some others to balance them. Whenever we are pushing for clean energy investments and energy transition investments, the electric grids and the grid transmission investments need to be taken into account. Otherwise, we may encounter exactly in the problem that you were mentioning before, the regressive aspects of policies where the poor are mostly harmed.
Thank you. Last 1 or 2 minutes, and honestly, we received a lot of comments and questions, and thanks very much for the engagement and the interaction from the audience. And we would go for hours still on these topics. So we cannot answer all of them, but maybe pick a last one on the hydrogen, okay, from Case Chan. Any thought on using hydrogen? Was there any need, for example, in Costa Rica? Was it in your research? Maybe Francesca or Wei Yan, the need to bring hydrogen in the game?
Wei Yan, you want to jump in?
Yeah, from the hydrogen point of view, that hydrogen actually in the US, we started hydrogen discussion back in 1980s, and it's on the fuel cell. So it can be utilized in the transportation, the fuel cell vehicle. And of course, at that time, the price of the fuel cell was so expensive because they require the platinum for the catalyst. So, but now at that time, I remember it was about $4,500 per kilowatt. And Nowadays, the price of the fuel cell dropped down to about $150 per kilowatt. That become affordable. So this is one way that people try to look at it, especially on the heavy vehicle side, heavy duty vehicle side. And then the other one is the generation side. And in the US, they already have several examples, try to mix the hydrogen and the natural gas to produce for the electricity production. So with that one, they will be able to reduce the carbon emission. And then if you watch in the COP27, some of the company also produce a pure hydrogen generation facility. And they have some example over there, like in the Toshiba, I believe in Toshiba or Mitsubishi, that they demonstrate the hydrogen generation side. And then the other one is, okay, in addition to the hydrogen, because sometimes hydrogen has a higher thermal content, it's about 33 kilowatt per kilogram. I forget the unit, but it's a higher thermal contents. And then compared, however, their liquefaction point is about minus 260 degrees. So degree C, it's difficult for transportation. So people also talk about ammonia, the NH3, as a substitute of the hydrogen. And they have a lower thermal content, but the liquefaction point, it's a minus 33 degrees C. Yeah. So it will be easy to transportation. And so this is the basic, it's going, yeah.
Thank you. I need to wrap up. Sorry for that.
No problem. I know that we have a time limit.
Sure. I mean, 1 hour is really short, and we have like I was just reading, for example, we have a climate reporter as well from the University World News Africa, Evelyn Ruvoko, who's asking about the carbon footprint. What are the most critical issues to consider? That we will not go through the answer. We have also somebody saying, like Anita Fagerman, perhaps thinking about flying cars. By the way, this is not a dream. We will have something like that in big events like the Olympics, for example, and in Dubai. We have also people who are saying, why not putting the location of the speakers? Yes, we didn't say at the beginning where we are located, like myself in Paris, Costa Rica, it's easy. And maybe in the bios, I mentioned the locations, but that's also a good idea. So if we can, I'm asking maybe Lorena, the organizers, if they could somewhere save all the comments and questions, maybe share them, because there have been a number of links that they have been provided by some people from the audience here that could be really useful. So I would like not to lose all the comments and the questions we have here. It's very good learning for all of us. I think the topic is, as you can see it, appealing a lot of passion and appealing a lot of questions, right? And there is no way to achieve that energy transition if we work in silos, if the education world work on their own, the transportation ones on their own, the hardware people who produce just the mechanical cars, for example, work on their own. The buildings is not anymore just a construction sector, but it's construction and artificial intelligence and a lot of technologies as well included. You could have also batteries as well in the buildings. So we are in a very much connected world, and there is not like a single answer to say hydrogen is good or not good, batteries are good or not good, right? Every case is different, every country is different, and one size doesn't fit all. And if I would take away from all what was said something, I would say we have to think about the solutions where the intelligence is part of them. The intelligence, the artificial intelligence, the technology, the digitalization, for example, can tell us what's the best way to reduce the energy consumption of the building and the decarbonization. This story is real time. It's not only one shot. it will tell us as well if the hydrogen is good for trucks, for example, or good for the whole transportation in a country. Or how do we deal, for example, with the country who want to reduce the emissions from transportation? Because you need the data from from everywhere, right? You need all the data, how many chargers we have, how much energy production we have from renewables and from conventional energy and so on. So we see that the world is changing. There is a disruption in this. The manufacturers of cars who work in Stellantis or Mercedes and so on, they have to restart from zero their education. I mean, they have been in mechanics for so many years, and now they have to understand what electrons are about, what data are about, right? So, the education should start while giving also lessons about double competencies, triple competencies, beside as well giving awareness on the SDGs and why do we need to do naturally, for example, things that are good for the environment. So on that point, I would like to thank Francesca, Irina, and Wei Yen for their intervention, for answering some of the questions. I would like to apologize for not answering all the questions and commenting on all your comments. But definitely, I would recommend to store all the information we received, and I'm looking forward for the next sessions.